Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss about SAPUI5 binding. But before understanding what is binding, I want to display what we are going to learn in this video. In this video, we will learn about different binding types like element binding, property binding, aggregation binding, expression binding. Along with it, you will learn about JSON models. There are different type of models in SAPUI5 like OData model, JSON model, XML model, and resource model. So we would specifically talk about JSON model, and you will learn about absolute binding paths and relative binding paths. What are the difference between these two paths? Along with it, there would be a complete learning. Expression binding is something that we are covering in detail. So you will learn lots of complex binding syntax in XML and how do we utilize it. Now let's understand what is binding in SAP UI5. Data binding is the process that establishes a connection between the application UI and business logic. So it establishes a connection between application UI and business logic. Business logic we write in JavaScript file, and application UI is the XML file. Now, the data binding connects the JavaScript and XML file. Let's see in the practical way. And before moving ahead, I also want to discuss about what we are going to learn in terms of JSON model. So let's just see the definition of JSON model. So JSON model is a client-side model and used for small data sets. So we are also using it for small data sets. It supports two-way binding. And there are certain methods that we would apply, like set data, get model, set property, get property. And there is a declaration. We will use the same declaration, new sap.ui.model.json.json model, and we would also see the global declaration of JSON model. Along with it, this is just for a definition that there is no built-in support available for JSON. It means we cannot send data back to the server. So because this model is specifically used for client side. Let's see everything in the practical way. So let's start the application development. First, I want to tell you that the Business Application Studio is enhanced. I mean, the UI is different again. They have enhanced it, and I think it is pretty cool because now the features are really good. And I'll give you a complete detail about this, but the small things that I can say, the left side panel is as it is. And if you click on these three bars, you can go to the file because initially when you will load it, you need to add your projects folder here. Click on this, these three bars, and click on the file. Then move to the open folder inside the home and then put slash user. Inside user, you go to your projects folder. The projects folder, you can find it here, and then you can click it and the project folder would be added on the left side panel. So for me, it is already added, so I'm not going to edit again. Now this is the get started screen where you can find your current dev space, and by clicking on this you can open your dev space manager where you can create another dev space. If you need any quick links related to guidance space, everything is here. Okay, but today we'll focus on our development part. So let me run my bank details application. To open the terminal, you need to press Control backtick, and this is a message that I'm getting that I need to clear some data or I have to create another dev space. You might face the same problems because I'm using the existing projects. So you can press Control back T and the terminal would be available for you. If you don't press it, you can click on this toggle panel button and the terminal would be open for you. I'm inside my bank details and I'm going to run this application. So I can press npm, sorry, I can write npm run start. This is the way we used to run the application, if you remember, because I think it's almost 2.5 weeks and I haven't posted a single video. Now, before our application run, I want to show you how our application going to be look. So this is the application UI. It is enhanced a little bit. We have put a beautiful image here and the car details. These details are also enhanced, and the UI is pretty much same, but you're going to learn about binding. Earlier, we were doing the hard coding values here, but now today you will learn about binding. Okay, so let me show you how our application looks exactly. This is exactly the same, but little bit UI enhancement is required. Okay, so we will first start by JSON as we discussed. So this is what we are going to learn today, right? Element binding, property binding, aggregation expressions, and JSON model too. So let me explain what JSON is. To close the terminal, I'll press Control backtick and I'll remove this get started screen. I'll go to my bank underscore details, go to my web app folder, go to the controller. Since we have a single controller and single view, I'll go to my controller, and this is the code that I'm going to write. I'm going to write the code inside on init function, and I'll make it a little big so you can see it quite nicely. And to do that, I have to click on this toggle secondary slide bar. Oh, sorry, the first one I need to press, which is toggle primary slide bar. Okay, now the space is pretty much available. I just make it a little bit readable. Okay, I think the text is visible now. So JSON model, as we have, as per the name, it is JavaScript object notations. So these are the JavaScript objects where you can store other objects and the data in value, key value pair. And just to display, I can say one let o data is equal to, and I can say it's an object. So this is an object. So in JavaScript object, you can pretty much store everything. Like you can store one another object, you can store the Boolean value, and sorry, I'm really sorry. You can store the Boolean value, you can store one string, and you can also store arrays. So this is the way that you can store pretty much anything. So here actually we haven't put any value, that's why it is displaying like that. And the key value pair, which I was saying, you can put a key like name, and you can provide a value to the name, like you can give a name, and you can store then another key value pair, and you can put the profile, and you can say the profile developer. So like this, you can store the data in a JavaScript object. So JSON is also pretty much same, and where you can actually store the data, you can store another object. So, and you can store the Boolean values, you can store the string value, you can store another array. So this is how the JavaScript objects are. Now what we have to do is that let me run our application. I mean, right now it might not run because for JavaScript there was some error that was displayed, so it might not be visible. Let me show you the application, because we are going to pick. So this data we are going to replace. So what I will do, account number, account holder name, IFS code, I'll put this data in the JavaScript object and the JSON object, and I'll create one bank details. Bank details would be the right name for this object. So now we want to run the application again and again. And what I will say that let OData, and inside OData, I have to remove this warning. I'm so sorry for this. Next time I'll fix this, but today we have to focus on our video. And I can say that it is a bank details array. Now I have, sorry, the object. Now I have a bank details object. Now I will read. Okay, both the applications are actually running all together. So, but I need to see, okay, so account number. So I'll copy this, and in short, we can write it as account num, which is pretty much okay. And the account number value, I'm just replacing the value. This is my account number. I mean, this is not my real account number, but as a value, I'm taking it up. So, okay, let me read all the fields at once so we can actually create it. I think there was another field was name, and the another field was IFS code. Okay, so it's account holder name and IFS code. So we'll work on these three things: IFS code and account holder name. So I can say holder name, or I can just give it the name, because since it's a bank detail, I can say name property, and I can give my name, or I can give Hector India channel name. And then one was IFS code. So IFSC I can put where I is capital, and I can give another number which is a IFS code. And now I have OData where I have the bank details object inside the OData object. This is called the JSON because here we have something called value and the key and value pair, right? So since we wanted to display this detail, we are providing this similar kind of detail. And now I show you how we can create a JSON object. And we have to put one semicolon after our data. And as I told you that when we declare the JSON model, since it's used for small data set, currently it's a very small data set. And these are the methods that we are going to use, and this is the declaration part. So this is the declaration new sap.ui.model.json model. So we are going to declare a model. And to do that, I can write let, or I can say just O model is equal to new sap.ui.model.json.gson. JSON model. This is the declaration. Now I have a OData model. So I need to store this information inside the model. And this is my OData model since I have declared it here. This is a standard functionality that we are using. So to store the data in model, I can write O model dot set data. As we discussed, there is a property called set data. Sorry, there's a method called set data. So I'm using the set data. We can use the get data method. We can use the set model and get property. Everything we can apply it here. So I can say o model dot set data, and I can pass this o data where all the details are, all this information is stored, and I can put it like that, o model dot set data. Now my data is set on this model, and I can actually write this dot get view. It means I'm getting this view, all the elements of this view. This dot get view dot set model. I'm really sorry for this annoying message here. This dot get view dot set model, and I can pass my model o model here. So what will happen? It will set the model on UI level, right? This piece of information we are setting on the model, and this dot get view dot set model is actually setting the model on the UI level. So what does it change? Let me run the application. Okay, there is some error. So error could be o model this dot get view o model dot set data, and then we are passing the o data. So okay, let me check what's the error, why the error is coming. Okay, it is saying this dot get view dot set model is not a function. Yes, it is not a function because the spelling is not correct. I have put model, not modle. So model is the actual correct spelling. Now probably it won't display any error and it would run the application successfully. If it will display the error, this is what our job is. We will remove the error. As a developer, our sole responsibility is to remove the error. Now, what did it change? Did it change anything? No, it didn't, because model we have set on the view level, but there is no binding. I mean, right now the data that is displayed here is the older one, which we have hard coded all the value. That's where the value is coming as Sumendra Kumar. And what value we have stored is Tactus India, and this number, these numbers, these data is different. Now, what we have to do, since the model data is now applied on the view level, we can actually go to the view and type the syntax. Now let me go to the app view and let me see what is there. So in app view, we have a core fragment, bank details. Then we have the list items. So we'll go to the bank details fragment. Inside the bank details, we have that application UI that we are talking about. Now this is our application UI where we have the avatar, and these are the, let me make it a little big. Now these are the three labels that we are talking: the account number, the account holder name. So these are the hard-coded values, right? So let me remove these values and let me replace them with the model values. And how do we do that? This is called the binding syntax. This is called the binding syntax. So what I can do is that I can put curly braces and I can check what is the name of my model. So the name of my model is O model right now. We'll give it a specific name, but right now it is O model. So I can write O model, and okay, I don't have to write the O model as well. It is because the model is already applied on all the views, so I can actually directly put the property name that I want to access. So I can put bank details. I can say that you, okay, let me close the app view. It is getting confusing. Go to the bank details fragment, put bank details slash, and I want to display this account number here. So bank details slash is the way to move inside the object property. So if you want to access any object property, you have to put slash. This is the way to access it. There are two different applications are running at the same time, so I closed the first one. Now our application is coming, and if you'll notice, this data is not coming. So let me check why it is not coming. Since we have put the bank details, we have put the account number, and this is what our account number, this is what our bank details are, and the model is set on the view level. So ideally, it should be visible. Okay, so I guess it is not coming because I haven't given the absolute binding path. I mean, I have given the slash here, but we have to provide the slash here as well. The reason being, this bank details is also inside an object, and whenever we access any property inside an object, we have to access it by using slash. So now if we will run the application, we will probably see the data of account number here. So the data of account number is 000009. Okay, there is a breakpoint which is getting triggered. Now if I'll run if the application is automatically running anyway. Okay, you can see the account number data is actually coming. Now let's see account holder name. Can we put the holder name as name? So I can go to my bank details and I can say instead of this text, I'll put curly braces. I'll say slash bank details slash name. I want to display the name. So if you want to display the name data, the name, so you need to put this key. This is the key, this is the value. So key you have to put here, and how to access the key, that is bank details. So this is the above object name that you have to put. You don't have to put the OData. It is because we have defined the OData. We have set the OData. Everything is inside the OData, this piece of information. So we have to put bank details. Sorry for this annoying message. Bank details, name. So if now we would run the application, let me close this developer console tool because it is closing the application again and again. If you'll notice, you will see the account holder name is also visible. So this path slash bank details slash account number, this is called the absolute binding path. As I told you, we'll discuss about the absolute binding path. This is called the absolute binding path, and the same known as relative binding path. Okay, to why I call it the relative binding path as well, it is because the bank details, if I can access only a single property, I can call that the absolute binding path. And the relative binding path means we are accessing another property inside an object. So we are accessing the property of account number, property of bank details object, and we are accessing the account number. So we can call it the relative binding path. I'm sorry, initially I said that we can call it absolute binding path. So this is not the absolute binding path. Let me show you what absolute binding path is. Instead of bank details, assume I have one more property here, and I can say the IFS code, and then I can say that this is my IFS code in case. So this is a direct property, right? I mean, this is not inside this bank details object. This is a separate property. And if I access the separate property directly, now instead of using the bank details property, I'll directly mention slash IFS code. So this is called absolute binding path, where we are referencing a key directly and displaying the value on the UI level. Now, if you will notice, this value would be displayed on the UI. If you will notice, this long number is displayed on the UI. This is called the absolute binding path, because and the relative binding path is when we access a particular property of an object. When we access a particular property, this is also a particular property of an object, but we are not providing any reference. I mean, this is also an object, but we are not providing any reference of the object name. We are directly accessing the property. So this is the path known as absolute binding path, and this is the path known as relative binding path. And for our use case, we want to use, and this is also called the property binding. Let me explain you why it is known as property binding, because as I said that we'll discuss the different type of binding. So ideally, property binding should come above, because this is what we are going to discuss first. So what is property binding? Property binding is when we bind a particular property with a data set. That is called the property binding. Particular property of what? Property of the text. Text is a control. ID is a property of this text, and the text is also a property of this text. In the same way, label is a control, ID is the property of this label, text is the property of this label, class is a property of this label. Same way, this text is also a property of the text control. And whenever we bind a particular data using the binding syntax, like in this case, we are using the relative binding path to bind this particular property of the text control, that's why it is known as property binding, because here we are binding a property of a control. That's why it is known as property binding. Now let me explain you what is element binding. So property binding is simple. We can bind any property with anything using the absolute binding path or relative binding path. We are using the both. Here we are using the relative binding path, and here we are using the absolute binding path. Now, because sometimes in interview you get this kind of question, what is the difference between relative binding path and absolute binding path? So we have already explained it. I mean, we have already discussed it. Now let me show you what is element binding. Element binding is something which is little confusing sometimes, but let me show you. If I don't bind the data directly here, and if I say that I would consider it as an element means a group, a pair. Okay, what is that? Okay. So if I consider it as a group of elements, how would I do that? And what is the way to bind it? But before that, I want to change these bank details. From bank details, I want to change it to account details, because this is what looks good. Account details looks really good for me. Now here, bank details we have to remove, of course, and these are the part that we have to remove. So to element binding, I'll explain you what element binding is. But when we bind a particular element of a data set with the UI controls, so element binding works with the child parent relationship. We can see the definition of element binding is that element binding allows you to bind elements of a specific object in the model, data model that we have created, like JSON model, which will create a binding context and allow relative binding within the control and all of its children. Now let me give you a practical understanding of this. Since they talk about the children, so I can assume that V box is a parent control and the three H box are the children of this parent control. So I can put a property called binding, and inside this I can pass the binding path. And if you will notice, everything is inside the account details. So I can copy this and I can say that you read the properties of account details. So I'm binding a particular object from the data model. Now this is a data model. This is one object. This is another property. I can create multiple objects that we'll create later. So as per the definition of element binding, we can bind a particular object of a data model with a control, and it will create a relative binding for all of its children control. So generally the aggregation binding works in this way, but for element binding, we are binding the data with a particular element in the object. So this is a separate object and I'm binding the data with it. So if I want to access the account number now, I can actually, I don't have to write this initial path here. I can directly access the account number. If I have to access the name, I can directly access the name. If I have to access the IFS code, let me see if okay, this is the actual property name. So I can put it here. I can directly access the IFS. I don't have to put the account details for all three. Earlier, to access these properties, we had to put, but since the above parent control has the binding property and we have defined the binding path for this is called the element binding, where the element we have defined in the binding path and all of its children control inherit the values, can access the values directly. This is what it is saying, that which will create binding context and allow relative binding within the control and all of its children. So within the control and all of its children, this is inside the control, inside the VBox we have the 3x box. So it is creating a relative binding path. So that's the reason we don't have to put account details again and again. We can put it once and we can access all of its property. And if you'll see the application, the data is not coming. So I have to see why the data is not coming. I think I have to remove the slash, because for binding, for absolute, we don't have to put absolute or relative binding path for this. We can directly put the object name and we can access the text. So let this application be okay. Still it is not coming. So I have to check why it's not coming. I think probably the issue is coming because we have put a slash here and we have put a relative binding or the absolute binding path here. Since these controls are within this VBox, within this VBox, so we don't have to put a absolute binding path. We can directly access the data, I guess, because this data is inside the account details. And since we have put a binding path for account details, this is what element binding is. Whatever is there inside this object, we can access them directly just by putting the key name. We don't have to specify a particular path for it. This is called the element binding. And now our data is visible here. So this is pretty simple. This is what element binding is. In the interview, you can give the answer that element binding allows you to bind elements to a specific object in the model. As we have done it here, this is the specific object inside this data model. This is the specific object. And another condition is which will create a binding context and allow relative binding within the control and all of its children. So within the control, it is creating a relative binding, which is so true because our data was not loaded when we put the slash here, which means our absolute binding path, our property binding. So property binding is not happening here. Here, that's why it is unique. That's why it is an element binding because we have specified the object name here, and now we are accessing the values of these the key and value pair of these objects using the relative binding path. So this is what it is, the relative binding it has created. So we are accessing it directly. This is the relative binding path. I think initially I have done a mistake where I told that this is relative binding path. I think this is the relative binding path. The initially the one that we discussed during the property binding, that was absolute binding path. Okay, so I was right initially. And so this is called the relative binding path where we have specified the object name here with slash. Don't forget to put slash here and then access the elements directly, access the keys using the key, access the values directly, and the value is also visible here. Now, the same thing we have to do for confidential detail as well, because in the confidential detail, we have these three, but we have two more properties like customer ID and the address. So we need to create two more properties inside that object, two more properties like customer ID and the address. The address is not visible. That also we have to fix. So let me go to the more details fragment. Now, in more details fragment, we have hbox. We have to do the same for element binding. In the vbox, we have to put one property called binding, and in binding we can provide the slash the object name. Object name is account details. I can copy and I can paste it here. And now in the text level, I can access the account number directly. I don't have to put the absolute binding part. This is what, okay, it has opened account number. And here I can put the name property. And here I can put the IFS code, IFSC. Okay, sorry, IFSC. I think this is correct. IFSC name and account number. IFSC name and account number. So initially for these three, it would be visible. And okay, there is no text called AWS, but I think if we are putting text as address, we have to put it in IATNet. This is different since that is not visible. So I'm putting it here. And if I'm keeping it address here, so I have to change it in IATNet. I have to see if any text as an address is there. Okay, address text is already there, so it would come directly, no problem. We can continue working on the more details. We don't have to put data in IHNet. So if I open, address is coming, and these three property data is also coming, like account number, fields data is also, whatever data is there. So these data is the hard-coded data right now, so I have to change this as well, the customer ID. So I have to create one more key called customer ID, and I can say that 12345 is the customer ID, and I can put address. Now in address is something, there are different fields in the address, right? So what I will do, I will create one more object, name as address, and inside this I will put things like city name. City name I can put New York, and then I can say postal code. I can say a postal code could be 12345. Then I can say country. Country. I can give the country name. So why am I doing this? Because whenever we get the address data, we don't get a complete string. We get data divided into a string like city, postal code, country, and then we have to concatenate this string on the UI level. That we are going to see how do we do that during the binding. During the binding, we'll see that. And actually, I have created this address field so I can actually copy paste it directly. So we don't have to spend much time on this. And okay, so that's how my address field looks like. Now it is pretty good. I have a property called city, postal code, house number, street, state. So everything is known as property because this is a property of address. Address is an object. Now account details is an object. This is also inside an object. So in JavaScript, in JSON, everything is an object, and these objects are interlinked with each other. And this is address. Sorry, address. Now I can bind the address as well. I can go to the bank details and sorry, not the bank details, the more details, and I can bind the object of the text. And how do I do? First I will do it for customer ID, and since it's a relative binding path, so I can put directly the customer ID, which would work fine. How we are binding everything, IFS code and customer ID. Now I have to put these details, so I have to specify. I can use the relative binding path, but I have to specify address because this is the part of address object. So I have to put address to access any property now. City, postal code, house number, street, state. I have to put address first. And so first I will display the house number. So I can go to the more details. I'll remove this text. And what I will do, I will put the address slash whatever the property I want to access. I want to access the house number. I want to display house number. I'll put the house number. Now I can put, usually we have a comma after house number, and I will create another binding syntax. Now here I will do address slash, I will say after house number, after comma, I would like to put the street. So this is Wall Street, and this would be displayed as a street. I can put a comma, and I can copy paste. And now after street, I want to display the city name. And so this city name I can put. Okay, I think we can change the city by New York because this is this is completely wrong. So I can put New York, and city could be Manhattan because Manhattan is inside New York, and the New York spelling, I don't know why did I wrote the wrong spelling. Maybe we call it New York. That's way okay. And the state, oh sorry, state could be New York, and Manhattan could be the city. So what I can do, I can say that okay, I can say Manhattan is the city name, and New York is the state. Now I can put city in the more details. Instead of this, I can say, okay, it has copied everything. Eat of street. I want to display city here. Now, I'm really sorry if you are hearing disturbing music. I don't know who is playing it, even though I'm recording at midnight. Somebody is playing loud music. I can clearly hear it out. Okay. Now this is the state city we have put. Now we will put the state. So we are arranging it in such a way that it should look little nicer. State, and then I can put at the end country. So because the data is in this way, okay, there is no country field, so I have to add it. Okay, and the country is USA. This is not my address actually. This is the address of a very big firm. And what is the name of that firm? You can comment it down uh, with whose address we are typing it here. Anyway, let's see how our application UI looks now. we have a comma separated values. So the purpose of doing this is to say that you can actually put multiple binding syntax. And remember, this is element binding because of the account details we are accessing. The address is also an object which is inside the account details. So it has created a relative binding path within the control. Within the control, whatever we will define, we can access it as relative binding. So here also we are not putting the slash as an absolute binding path. And let's see, let me run the application. Ideally it should run. If it will not run, I will check why it's not running. And luckily it is running. There are comma separated values: 001 Wall Street, Manhattan, New York, USA. There is no comma between Manhattan and New York. That probably I can put now. There is no comma between city and street. I can put the comma. So this is what the absolute binding. Now we have, sorry, this is what the element binding. This is relative binding paths. This is what the relative binding path, and this is the element binding. So property binding and absolute binding path are related. Element binding and relative binding path are related. And I think aggregation binding and relative binding path is also related. So now let me show you what is aggregation binding.